To it, and as you reached out your hand to receive that gift, you recognize that by the very physical act of opening your hand, you were mirroring your consciousness of expanding your ability and capacity for goodness.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. See, but that's a good idea. I think I'd like to do that. But when you say yes to life and yes to a gift, you're opening your hand, and you're by the very opening expanding your capacity for goodness. And on the contrary, have you ever been offered a gift that you wanted to say no to? And as you said no, you began to contract and contract and contract. And you contracted to the point where you started to wonder, am I cutting myself off from my source of good? Am I cutting myself off from my source of joy or my source of love? Am I contracting? Is that a bad thing? Because truly there's no difference in opportunity between yes and no. If it's a yes for us, then it's all about that outward expansion. And if it's a no for us, it's all about that contraction, what may look like a withdrawal, but it's actually the beginning of an inward journey to return to the truth of who we are. So there's power and there's a gift in both saying yes for the expansion and no to the contraction. Unity's co-founder Charles Fillmore used to say that whether we say yes or whether we say no, it's an opportunity to either stoke the fires of love, that energy and that vibration that's within us, or to transmute that which is not serving us and bring it back to love. Either way, yes or no, a gift is a gift to be celebrated. This season at Unity of Wilmington, we've been celebrating gifts. For the last 2 weeks, we've celebrated the gift of the Lord's Prayer from Jesus of Nazareth. So for over 2,000 years, generation after generation has been blessed with this mighty, amazing gift called the Lord's Prayer. Also, generation upon generation has been blessed by Jesus' commandment to love. It's called the greatest commandment. He said it was a central part of his teaching, and we're here today to celebrate that gift. When I got on the internet and I looked at the word love and how many times it appeared in the Bible, apparently it depends on the English translation you're looking at. If you are looking at the King James Version, love appears 419 times in the entire Bible from Genesis to Revelation. But if you look at the New Revised Standard Version, love appears 791 times. Now, Unity's Bible is the New Revised Standard Version, so I now have linked with my logic that Unity subscribes or ascribes to the Love Bible. But sprinkled throughout the Gospels in the Christian scriptures are Jesus' commandment to love in various and different forms. At one point, Jesus was asked, what's the most important commandment of all? And he turns around and quotes Deuteronomy in the book of Mark. He says, "Hear, O Israel, you shall love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength." When I hear that, I get excited because I think about, "Hear, O Israel." Metaphysically, Israel represents our spiritual consciousness. So it's that activating of spiritual consciousness, and then using love as a vibratory energy, we are drawn to that spiritual consciousness. So our human thoughts, our human ideas, our human beliefs are transmuted as they're drawn to that spiritual consciousness. I think "Hear, O Israel" is like a gong, like bong, spiritual consciousness. And we're all like, all my thoughts, all my ideas, and all of my beliefs are now coming into harmony, coming into frequency, coming into alignment with the divine. Hear, O Israel. Love God. Love God. In the book of Luke, Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan. And that parable invites us into loving everyone. Loving all of our neighbors, whether or not they are different or the same from us, but it's important to love our neighbors. So we take the metaphysics of the difference between the Jews and the Samaritans, and we can apply it to our contemporary times. It doesn't matter if you're white or you're black. It doesn't matter if you are young or if you are old. It doesn't matter if you are gay or if you're straight. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican. What matters is when someone's hurting, that we love and care for them. And what matters is when we are hurting, we allow someone else to love and care for us. For when we care for another and when we allow another to care for us, we change the world. We change the world we live in by simply loving our neighbor and allowing our neighbor to love us. In the book of John, Jesus said, I give you a new commandment that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you should also love one another. And in case that wasn't clear enough, because his job was to stretch our minds, to create that new paradigm for us to live into where we're in the kingdom of heaven. In the book of Matthew, he said, we have to love our enemies. If you are only kind to your friends, how different are you from anyone else? He invited us to love our enemies. He invited us to love people who persecute us. And he invited us to love the corrupt tax collector, which is not a statement about politics in any way at this time. Just saying. We are invited to love God. We are invited to love each other. We are invited to love our neighbor. We're invited to love our enemies. And finally, we go back to the book of Mark where he says, love your neighbors as yourself. And this, perhaps, is a challenge. I don't know. So let's have an exercise. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And the reason why I'm going to ask you to close your eyes is because when we close our eyes, we put on spiritual ears. And when we have our spiritual ears on, even though there are other people saying other things in the room, it's all about their personal spiritual discovery, and we get to focus on our personal spiritual discovery. So close your eyes. And then bring to mind someone or something you absolutely adore. It could be a parent or a child or a partner or even a pet. And then I want you to say out loud, I love you. I love you. And then I want you to bring to mind a friend or a neighbor that you happen to like. And put them in front of you. And I want you to say out loud, I love you. I love you. And now I invite you to put in front of you someone who you probably don't like. Someone you may consider an adversary or even an enemy. And I want you to say, I love you. I love you. And finally, I want you to put your arms around yourself and think of just yourself. Just yourself and say, I love you. I love you. And then take a breath and open your eyes. And then here's the quiz. Who is the easiest person to say I love you to? The first one, the people you already love, right? Okay, and then who is the most difficult to say I love you to? Yourself. See, that was not really a trick question. Sometimes it is harder to say I love you to the adversary or the enemy. And sometimes it's the hardest to say I love you to ourselves. I'm not inviting self-judgment. I'm inviting a notice. I'm inviting an observation. Because once we become aware of where we are in consciousness, we can tune into that, Hear, O Israel, and elevate our consciousness into that spiritual place where it's as easy for us to love God, to love our friends, to love our loved ones, to love our adversary, and to love ourselves. I'm not talking about the media kind of love, because the media kind of love is really an emotion or a feeling. And that media kind of love is not a healthy love. That media kind of love that's a feeling or an emotion is one that invites behaviors of possessiveness and addiction and controlling. It's the kind of love that really puts the rest of us in therapy because it's not real. It's not the unconditional love that Jesus was talking about. Stream of consciousness people or entities like Abraham and David Hawkins talk about, whoa, I just got this whole sugar rush. Breathe. Okay. Stream of consciousness. People like Abraham and David Hawkins teach that love is not an emotion, that love is a frequency. Love is a frequency and a vibration that we tune into. Charles Fillmore, the our co-founder, talked about love being that energy that emanates from the heart, wanting nothing but the best for the object of its affection. So it is that vibration and that frequency that we tune into that can change everything. David Hawkins said this, and it pertains to the whole idea of the human torus. Are you familiar with the human torus? Where we have this love field of energy that as we expand, the love goes outward. As we contract and do our inner work, the love comes inward. But whether we're coming in, it ends up going out. And whether we're going out, it ends up coming in. David Hawkins said this, love focuses on the goodness of life in all its expressions and augments that which is positive. It dissolves negativity by recontextualizing it rather than by attacking it. And what that has to do with is the law of expansion. So if you know the law of expansion, it's whatever we focus on grows. So if we are attacking something, if we're spending our time trying to make our anger different or our despair different or our discomfort or our resentment different, then we're going to grow more resentment, anger, despair, and all of those negative emotions. But if we invite them in and bring them into that vibration of love, then we transmute them into more love. We recontextualize them into more love. And I'm going to give you an example in a story. Rob was 10 years old. Rob was very industrious, and he made some money by mowing lawns and shoveling snow, raking leaves. He had saved $60. So at the beginning of summer, he made a deal with his dad to buy a used bicycle. Father Allen was selling his used bicycle, and it was just the kind of 10-speed you would imagine a priest to have. The silver wasn't so shiny, the seat was a little worn, and it didn't have baseball cards on the spokes. But Rob took his $60 and made a deal with his dad to pay back the other half by Christmas time. He got the bike, and at the beginning of the summer, he began to ride it. He rode it all through autumn. He rode it to the end of the neighborhood. He rode it to the end of town. He rode it sometimes as far as the beach. And very frequently, he rode it to the movies. It gave him a freedom that was exhilarating, and he loved every minute of it. As Christmas approached, there were a couple of snowstorms, and he was able to shovel and make the last payment to his dad just a week before Christmas. And he never felt better. In his family, there were 7 kids, and his sister was relegated the banana seat 5-speed bike and had never been able to keep up with him all summer, but it didn't bother Rob one little bit. They also had a tradition in their family where the oldest kid got to open the present first, and then the next kid got to open the present, and they had to go one by one by one. And his parents were those really kind of practical parents who got sneakers and shirts and socks for their kids for Christmas. So with every kid, it was like, great, here comes another belt. Great, here comes a pair of underwear. And poor Rob and Liz were the youngest, and they had to wait a full 45 minutes for their turn. But when it was his turn, he opened his gifts from his parents, and then his father put in front of him a used record player. And he realized that this used record player was going to be the best present ever, because it gave him freedom from fighting with everybody else over the family stereo. So he was happier than he thought he could be happier with his 10-speed bike. Until his dad called his sister into the garage and presented her with her Christmas present. A brand new 10-speed Schwinn. Pink. With little poofy things coming out of the handlebars. And Rob was beside himself. His bike wasn't important. His record player wasn't important. And he began to withdraw. He was filled with resentment, because when he began to hear his sister's squeals of excitement, all he could hear was the sputtering of a lawnmower and the scrape of his metal shovel against the concrete while he shoveled snow. After a couple of weeks, his dad pulled him aside and said, "Son, you okay?" And he was trying not hard to complain. He was trying really hard not to complain. But out of his mouth came this whine, "Dad, it is not fair. My bike's not new. I had to pay for it myself. And she didn't even do anything for that new bike." And his dad listened to him and said, "Son, have you ever considered that that bike wasn't for her?" By the spring, Rob and Liz began riding their bikes together. They rode them to the end of the neighborhood. They rode them to the end of town, and sometimes they rode them as far as the beach, and frequently they rode their bikes to the movies. Eventually, they became best friends. And when their parents went away and they grew into their teenage year, they planned secret parties. And then after they got their driver's license, they played the game, "Who can leave the less gas in the tank?" Did you ever play that one? I did. Anyway, so they became fast friends. Rob went off to college, and the year after, Liz followed him and went to the same college. They ended up graduating at the same time, and it wasn't until Rob became an adult that he recognized what the gift truly was. It was a gift of companionship. It was the gift of friendship. It was a gift that was really for him to have and to cherish. And his father had invited him to shift his focus from resentment and transmute those negative feelings that he was having with that frequency and that vibration of love. Now, sometimes we don't want to wait until we grow up, because who knows when that's going to happen. Who knows when we're going to grow up and be fully spiritually mature. But we can support ourselves with sound and with music and with tones, with special tones that help transmute that frequency of something that's less than love, something that's resentful or anger or possessiveness or control. We can transmute those feelings by bringing in that frequency of love. I'm going to invite the choir to come up, because modern research shows that these things can happen. That there's a Vedic system of harmonics, there's a Himalayan system of harmonics, and when we play those harmonics like we will during meditation, our minds, our hearts, our thoughts, our ideas are all returned to that place of Israel, to that place of higher spiritual consciousness. And when we sing them, they are also returned to that place of higher spiritual consciousness. So please close your eyes. The lights will come down. The choir will gift you with the contemplation chant, and then we will go into a time of meditation.